This is an RNZ podcast.
They say life is stranger than fiction.
You would know, you would hear a ringing if it was actually affecting you, and you would probably feel yourself being cooked if it was that strong.
But you've got to have some really powerful pulse for it to create that kind of effect.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
But sometimes what we see in movies or read in books is so incredible that it obviously couldn't be possible. Or could it?
But then I did another experiment with the kids, and that is I put my phone into the microwave and tried to call it, and I could see it right there, but it just didn't get any reception at all. So a microwave is a very good Faraday cage.
I'm Bryan Crump, and welcome to Sci-Fi Sci-Fact. This week's Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, tinfoil hats and their use in sci-fi and to protect the brain and the head from some sort of invisible radiation, I guess it might be, or waves of some sort. And here to tease out whether there's anything plausible about that is Professor Justin Hodgkiss from Victoria University Wellington's Chemistry Department and also co-director of the Diamond Institute. And now to set the scene for this week's edition of Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, our weekly exploration of the intersection between science fiction and reality, this random guy from the internet.
Short video showing you the benefits of covering your nut at night or in the day if you think you've got the testicle fortitude to go outside looking like an idiot. Now this might be a bit extreme to some people, but at night time, if you're out walking around it's dark, so you can get away with it a little bit. You've got the saucepan, you got to get one that fits right. You could put a chin strap or something around here, or just tape it on. The importance here is to stop those radio waves in the air, the electro waves, from getting in your nut and disturbing your thinking, or making you think wrong thoughts, making you eat hamburgers and stuff like that. Negative stuff. You want to stay positive. All right.
Foil hats. When we put a hat of foil on our heads, well, as far as you know from popular culture, Justin, what were they trying to do? What were they trying to protect their brains from? I'm assuming the brains were the things they were trying to protect themselves from.
Yeah, that's right. So as far as I can see, the first reference to tinfoil hat was from the 1920s, from a short story by Julian Huxley, who's the brother of Aldous Huxley. And Julian himself was an evolutionary biologist, actually, but he did dabble in science communication and short stories. And in his story, Tissue Culture King, tinfoil hats was kind of used as a plot device, and the idea was that they protected people against telepathy and mind control. And the idea being that they, interfere with and block the type of radiation that would be used to control your mind. And since then, in the last 100 years, they've made many appearances in popular culture and films and TV. And I guess that they're associated with a kind of a paranoia around mind control and the government, reading your mind and controlling your mind.
So it's more the control of the brain as opposed to some kind of attack on the brain.
Well, I'm sure that's part of it too, and I guess the general idea behind it. And this is not the part that I'm kind of defending, but the idea behind it is that invisible electromagnetic waves interact with the brain. But we can talk more about the science behind that and why a tinfoil hat was even proposed as being a defense against this.
Okay, well, the first segue that I'm already seeing here is the idea that some kind of radiation, electromagnetic radiation, might be able to influence the brain. I thought the brain was it's a bunch of chemical reactions and electric charges inside a skull. Is there any evidence that our brains are in fact affected by radiation? At least the thinking, the cognitive part of the brain.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really believe...
And you're a chemist.
I'm a chemist, I should say that. So, certainly the brain, when neurons fire, those are electromagnetic signals. When I say electromagnetic, I mean electric fields and charges moving. And, that does result in waves. We talk about brain waves. The frequency of those electromagnetic waves in the brain, or brain waves, I think, from my understanding, are much slower than what we would think of as electromagnetic radiation, as in, radio waves and things. So they're more, the timescale that we have thoughts and are aware of things is more like frequencies of a few hertz, a few times a second, or tens of hertz, or something like that. But you can measure them, and to measure them, you need to put electrodes, on a special cap that need to, be connected to your skin really sensitively so that you can detect these really weak things.
Can I ask you, Justin, what is a brain wave then?
Well, it's just a pattern of electromagnetic activity, of electric fields essentially moving, as neurons fire through the brain. And
because as an electrical charge is transferred, there will also be a bit of a magnetic field. And is that what we're detecting when we try and detect brain waves?
That's why we call it electromagnetic. We're actually generally just detecting the electrical side of it, but when charges move, it causes a magnetic field. So that's why we talk about electromagnetism. And it is actually, in the brain, it is actually generally ions that move around. So we... that the brain does have a signal which we can measure. It's much slower than electromagnetism, in the sense of radio waves or whatever. But if you want to go the other way, like as in to get electromagnetic radiation into the brain, well, first of all, it would need to be on those kind of frequencies in order to kind of interact with the brain. But also, basically, the main mechanism for electromagnetic radiation interacting with tissue is heating. So you would actually probably be cooked before anything else happened, because it would need to be a really strong radiation. It wouldn't. You would notice.
Is there any evidence that tinfoil does foil actually protect you? Does foil stop electromagnetic radiation? Does it bounce off foil?
Yes, and it depends. So there is some basis to that, and I guess that's the origin of this showing up in stories. So there's an effect attributed to Michael Faraday, and apparently Benjamin Franklin dabbled in this as well. But it's called the Faraday effect, and leading to what we call Faraday cages. And it basically says that if you have a conductive shell, let's say a ball made of foil, then inside the shell, if you put electric charge on the shell, or if you expose it to radiation, you cannot feel any charge or any electric field inside the shell. So that's kind of proven in physics. And so that means that if you're inside that shell, let's say if you take your phone in there, you will not be able to get any signal, because the electromagnetic fields, i.e. the light waves or the radio waves from outside, will not penetrate. So that is very real, and that's called a Faraday cage. And so some other examples of that are, it's actually quite safe to fly in an aeroplane through a lightning storm, because inside the aeroplane acts like a Faraday cage. You're not going to get electrocuted. And microwave the door of a microwave has got a mesh on it. So the microwave's kind of got metal cavities to contain the microwaves inside, and you actually can have holes in a cage, hence the term cage, as long as they're much smaller than the wavelength of the light. So the holes in a microwave door, the mesh, if you look closely, they're much smaller than the actual microwaves themselves. So that's all based on the Faraday effect. You can create a cage that blocks radiation.
Does that mean that if you want to protect yourself, you don't need a foil hat, you need to put a microwave on your head?
Well, yeah, a microwave on your head would do a better job. But the problem is, I referred to how the holes in a microwave need to be smaller than the wavelength of the light, which is for a microwave, I think about 10 centimeters or so. So the holes need to be much smaller than 10 centimeters, much, much smaller. But so for a Faraday cage to work, it's got to be enclosed, or if it's got holes, they've got to be much shorter than the wavelength of light. So if you're trying to protect yourself from, so what I'm saying is it can't be it can't be kind of a dome, a hat shape, because it's got a massive hole in it. And if you're trying to protect yourself, say, from radio waves, from mobile phone transmission or something like that, again, that's on the order of centimeters wavelength. So the holes can only be, fraction of a centimeter in order for it to still work as a Faraday cage.
Did you do any experiments on this at home, Justin?
I actually did. So I'd read about the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden when he, dumped all of those sensitive documents and negotiated his escape and met with some lawyers. And so this isn't my experiment, but I'm leading up to it.
Yep.
He met with lawyers in Hong Kong, and he apparently had them put all of their phones into the fridge so that there was no possibility of eavesdropping. I guess he knew all about surveillance techniques. And the idea, his thinking behind that was that it would be a Faraday cage and there'd be no reception. So first I tried that experiment, and my phone still had reception in the fridge. I put my phone in and called it from my wife's phone, and it still rang. And I suspect that it's just because modern fridges have probably got more of a plastic shell. It probably works pretty well to insulate from sound. It was a bit muffled, but it probably didn't have enough, if any, metal. But then I did another experiment with the kids, and that is I put my phone into the microwave and tried to call it, and I could see it right there, but it just didn't get any reception at all. So a microwave is a very good Faraday cage at least for kind of gigahertz frequencies, which are the kind of frequencies that we use for telecommunications.
So Edward Snowden used the wrong domestic device. He should have used a microwave, not a fridge.
Yeah, possibly, or maybe just older fridges did actually have metal.
The thing is, this rings a bell with me. Didn't Michelle Dickinson do a little experiment? Because isn't it? See, another thing about the foil hat, like, okay, that's just a hat. But if you want to, if radiation's coming out from underneath, it's still going to get into the brain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Michelle Dickinson put out a video about how to design the perfect tinfoil hat, and her advice was you make sure it's really conductive. So maybe a gold hat would be better, but also it's got to be a full, it's got to cover everything in order for it to shield radiation. And the other thing I would say is that you don't, when you're working with conductive things and interactions with radiation, you don't want it to be too pointy because, or you don't want it to have kind of an elongated shape, because then you could actually be inadvertently acting as an antenna. You could be amplifying and collecting radiation that you're trying to protect yourself from.
Yeah. Another thing here, now, when I'm recording stuff out in the field, and the one of the premises of a microphone is a little magnet in there, isn't there? And the sound waves make a vibration, and then that moves a magnet, and that creates a little electrical signal that is then stored as a recording, if my understanding is right, Justin, and feel free to interrupt here. And sometimes when I record, the other day I was recording a beautiful still scene. It was in the middle of the night, and I was out in the bush. And when I went back and listened later on, there was all this buzzing and fuzzy noise. And I thought I didn't hear anything. But then I thought, hang on, I was sitting right underneath some power cables, the really high voltage cables. I think it's the one that goes to the Cook Strait cable. And I wondered whether my microphone, the magnet, had picked up electromagnetic radiation or the magnetic field of the wires, and that's what I heard.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Certainly, for example, in the lab that I work in, we some really sensitive equipment, so not microphones, but other equipment, we really need to make sure that it's shielded from electromagnetic radiation, as in just electricity zooming around cables in the lab, because even though just walking through you wouldn't notice anything, sensitive equipment will pick up just, little waves and little oscillations that will, mix with your data and ruin your experiment. So I think it's kind of the same thing. Like, it's not that the signal that you hear is not the actual sound, but the electrical current nearby is creating tiny electric fields that do interact with your magnet, I would suspect.
Yes, and spoiled the stillness somewhat. Not to my ear, but to the microphone. So when I played it back later on, It wasn't quite as calming as I'd hoped.
Yeah. But that actually reminds me of something called the microwave auditory effect that was shown in the 60s. And that is that pulses of microwave radiation can actually be heard by some people. And the reason for that is actually you're not directly hearing the microwaves, but and this needs to be for fairly high power microwave radiation, and it has to be pulsed. But what's happening is that it's actually heating part of the auditory apparatus, and it's creating tiny pressure waves that are actually the pulses. And so pressure waves in a very sensitive ear means that it sounds, so you kind of hear a ringing. But this was something, and I think this is kind of the only example of kind of, electromagnetic radiation, I guess, that you can directly hear or that has some interaction beyond seeing it and stuff with your nervous system. But it's a heating effect. And I think that for if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, so obviously ionizing radiation can be really damaging, and we need to be really careful about X-ray doses. And then we've got UV. That's honestly the most dangerous form of radiation that we're always exposed to. Sunburn is the biggest risk. But then as you get to lower energy radiation, the main way, almost the only way that it interacts with us is by heating us, just like how a microwave heats food. So it would need to be really strong, and you would feel yourself getting warm.
As you pointed out there, electromagnetic radiation can be damaging, can be dangerous. So tell us about some of the things that are a bit more detail, some of the things that are dangerous to us, and what we need to wear if we want to protect ourselves from them, or is it just a case of staying well clear?
Yeah, I mean, so what we call ionizing radiation is light energy that's really, photons have really high energy. So this is X-rays, gamma rays, and extreme UV. And that's dangerous because when we say ionizing, it means that it's got enough energy to break bonds and to pull electrons out of things. So it will actually change, DNA in your skin tissue. And then as we move down, UV, I think, is really actually the type of electromagnetic radiation to worry about in the form of sunburn. That's honestly the biggest radiation risk, if you like. And the way that we protect ourselves from that is sunblock and wearing a hat. Just a normal hat will do.
Yes.
Protecting from lower energy radiation like microwaves and radio waves. Certainly our microwave ovens, partly it needs to be built as a Faraday cage because it needs to confine the radiation into the box in order to have enough energy to cook your food. If some microwave radiation leaked, it would you just feel warm. And likewise, and another good example of just feeling warm from low energy radiation is an infrared kind of outside heater that makes you warm. And if you've had an ultrasound, either an ultrasound scan or kind of as part of physiotherapy or something, that's putting in radio waves that interact with your tissue, and it just kind of jiggles it around a bit. And when things jiggle around, it just makes you a bit warm. So you would certainly notice if you were, if it was getting too warm, that would need to be very high power. But really, that's the mechanism that radiation interacts with us, just warming us up.
The UV light. Now, sorry to ask a really dumb question, but infrared and ultraviolet, they're at opposite ends of the visible spectrum of light, correct?
Yes, that's right. Visible lies in between those. Yep.
And is ultraviolet the higher frequency and infrared the lower frequency?
That's right. Yep.
We can't see UV, can we?
Not really. We can see just the kind of, like when blue transitions to UV, we can see the tail of the UV, I guess. But for example, if you wore some UV protective glasses, they would look transparent.
UV light damages us, our skin can damage our skin and damage the DNA in our skin. But light in the visible spectrum can't?
Not so much. So when you get sunburnt, it really is from the UV part. Or another way to look at that is when you put sunblock on, which is protecting you from the UV, it actually doesn't kind of have much of a color. Or sometimes it looks kind of white, which is just that it kind of reflects everything.
Yes.
But it doesn't, you don't turn orange or anything when you put sunblock on because it's targeting the UV part rather than the visible. So
what's in the sunblock that blocks out the UV?
There's different types of sunblock. So the main type uses titanium dioxide as the main pigment, or zinc oxide, and these are just white powders that are formulated with as a paste, but that we find them in paint, for example, just as kind of something that holds the pigment. So those just kind of reflect everything, but they have very, very strong absorption in the UV. But then there's some people get irritated by that kind of sunblock, and there's other organic kind of sunblocks. I didn't think we were going to end up talking about this, but I actually have a research project on the mechanism by which the natural pigment eumelanin dissipates UV energy. So that's the brown pigment in our skin,
yes,
also in our hair and squid ink and things like that. And that is very effective at dissipating UV energy, and we've used lasers to kind of understand why that is.
Oh, really? It's just that those of us with paler skins don't have enough of it.
Don't have enough of it, exactly. Yep.
Sometimes when I go to radio installations, say there's a broadcasting transmitter, there'll be big signs saying danger, radio, I think it's radio radiation or just danger radiation. What is it that is a risk there? What's the hazard there?
I think it's just that when you get close, it's very high power because it's, sending out waves a long way. But yeah, to be honest, the risk is probably not that high, but it could be, risk to electrical equipment. And, to be honest, they probably just don't want people going close to really high voltage, high power things.
It does sound to me, although you say it's not that dangerous, that if my inner ears getting slightly cooked by microwave pulses, it doesn't sound that good for my hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would know, you would hear a ringing if it was actually affecting you, and you would probably feel yourself being cooked. if it was that strong.
But you've got to have some really powerful pulse for it to create that kind of effect.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Increasingly, Justin, our worlds are full of radio waves or some kind of electromagnetic waves. For example, my mobile phone, the Wi-Fi. Now, it wasn't that long ago that mobile phones, there were memes going around talking about, you might remember the one, the mobile phone, it rang and it boiled an egg or something like that. People were worried about that kind of stuff. I mean, I know, Justin, we didn't prepare you for this, but is there any way that a mobile phone could possibly boil an egg?
No, I would say not. Well, definitely not. I was going to make a smart comment about using your mobile phone, connected to your Internet of Things devices, to your kettle or whatever. But no, the actual power coming from a phone is tiny, and to the extent that it would heat anything, it would just be absolutely minute. So there's actually been some there's a study from the World Health Organization, well, not a study, but just some published notes about the potential for mobile phones to be carcinogenic, and it's widely misinterpreted. So basically they classify mobile phones as maybe carcinogenic or something like that. So they don't say it probably is, and they don't say it definitely is. But the reason that they say it definitely isn't is just because it requires a lot of research to prove that it definitely isn't. In the case of cancer, it's very hard to prove that something definitely isn't, that definitely doesn't cause cancer, and so they just can't prove that. But a lot of people interpret that as thinking that it probably does cause cancer, and there's absolutely no evidence for that.
Justin, given the amount of use we now have of wireless technology, is there any point where the air would be full, like there's no more room for any more radio waves, communication waves? Are we anywhere near that?
Yeah, I guess it's, you wouldn't think about the air being physically full, but it's more a case of, having enough spectral bandwidth that we can send signals without them interfering with each other. And so, as we move to 5G, for example, there's just going to be more space for more data to move around. So, all of these signals are extremely weak, and we've got good electronics to pick them up. So it's not a case of kind of filling up the air, but it's more using smart technology to be able to transmit high density of information and data without it interfering.
Let's go back full circle. We began by talking about brainwaves and the idea that the foil hat is there to protect your brain from being manipulated by outside radiation that might fire off your neurons in your brain and control you. And you talked about how we can pick up brainwaves, so we can see activity in the brain by the electromagnetic activity in the brain when neurons fire. So if we can pick it up coming from inside the brain to the outside, it does seem to me possible that you could have some sort of radiation that goes from the outside to the inside and might be able to fire a neuron. Could that be possible?
Yeah, well, this is a good question. And I think that there's a lot of work going on, not so much with radiation, but with kind of prosthetic implants for people who have, suffered brain injuries and things like that. Prosthetic implants that can, simulate signals and interface directly with the brain. So there is quite a bit going on in that space, which is about all I know. I don't think it would ever be a kind of a remote type thing where there's some invisible radiation and someone's interfacing with you that way. It would be an actively implanted device. I was about to say microchip, but shouldn't go there.
No, that's another whole wave of paranoia just set off there, Justin. However, final question. Given your understanding of the laws of physics and chemistry, Justin, could telepathy ever be possible?
Given my understanding of the laws of physics and chemistry, I do not believe that telepathy as we know it from science fiction could be possible. But certainly, quantum mechanics talks about entanglement of things at a distance, and things like that definitely are possible, but I'm not sure how that really translates to human consciousness.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, hosted by me, Bryan Crump, produced by Andrew Robertson, and of course, made possible thanks to the incredible knowledge of those brilliant scientists at the MacDiarmid Institute. You can find more episodes of Sci-Fi Sci-Fact on the RNZ podcast page. RNZ's podcasts are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, or pretty much wherever you find your podcasts. And make sure to follow us so you don't miss out on any new episodes.